Hello, my name is Dale Maley. I gave this PowerPoint presentation many different times in the spring of 2025. I thought I'd convert it to a YouTube video so lots of people could have more access to it. So before we begin, let's refresh our memories. What exactly was the Underground Railroad? It was a network of secret routes and safe houses established in the United States during the early to mid-19th century. Enslaved African Americans used it primarily to escape into free states and from there on to Canada. It was mainly the work of free African Americans and was assisted by abolitionists and others sympathetic to the cause of the escapees. The enslaved people who risked capture and those who aided them are also collectively referred to as the passengers and conductors of the Underground Railroad. So, just how many slaves were there in the South prior to the Civil War? About 4 million. That comes from the 1860 census, which recorded 3,953,760 enslaved people in the United States, and this is considered the final count of slaves before the Civil War. And when did the Civil War start? It basically started on April 12th of 1861, when Confederate forces fired upon Fort Sumter, South Carolina. Most sources say the Underground Railroad began around 1840. It ran north and grew steadily until President Abraham Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation on January 1st, 1863. That proclamation declared that all persons held as slaves within the rebellious states are and henceforward shall be free. One estimate suggests by 1850, approximately 100,000 enslaved people had escaped to freedom via this network. I'm a retired engineer, so I have to do the math. 100,000 out of 4 million total slaves works out to 2.5% escaped using the Underground Railroad. I am by no means an expert on the Underground Railroad, other than the limited research which I did for this presentation. But the most valuable reference that I came across was a book written clear back in 1898 called The Underground Railroad From Slavery to Freedom by William Seibert. And that old book, you can get free copies of PDF files of it from the internet, or you can actually buy reprints, new copies. Here's a map of the Underground Railroad from the 1898 book. And the first thing that struck me looking at this map was most of the routes of the Underground Railroad were actually through Ohio. And you have to remember that Missouri was a slave state down south of Illinois. And you'll notice there aren't many routes in central and eastern Illinois. Now if we zoom in on this map and look at central Illinois, you can only see one route starting at Eppards Point, going through Pontiac and up to Ottawa. And that's the only thing in our area. There was a branch over to the east and there was one to the west. But I did not research those two routes because I was focusing just on Livingston County. Here's a here's a list of most of the reference articles I used for the research for this presentation. And number one on the list is the 1898 Professor Seibert's book, which has a map from the Weston area up to Ottawa. I checked the 1878 Livingston County History book, the 1879 McLean County History book, the 1908 Ford County History book. And by the way, there was no information on that eastern route shown on the map in that history book. 1977, Stuffed Clubs and Antimacassars by Fairbury historian Alma Lewis James. I checked the Sentinel newspaper and the Pontiac Daily Leader, which had some articles. I did check the Pantograph, and I couldn't find any articles before 1865 relating to Livingston County. Now, as we saw in the 1898 map from the book, most of the Underground Railroad routes in Illinois were in the western half of Illinois and kind of followed the Mississippi River. There was only one major route in east central Illinois, which was many miles east of Livingston County. Now let's review our local Livingston County history. The first settler family in the county was Valentine Darnell in 1830. then Livingston County was not formed until 1837. And Livingston County was one of the last counties in Illinois to be settled in the state. Why is that? Well, the land was swampy and no railroads existed to ship agricultural supplies in or ship farm products out. In 1850, Congress passed a scrip law which gave free land to primarily veterans of the War of 1812. This new law created a rush of settlers into Livingston County between 1853 and 1860. By 1860, all the farmland in the county had been claimed by the early settlers. So, because there were almost no farmers living in Livingston County between 1830 and 1853, it's not surprising to me that there were no major underground railroad routes in the county. Now, Alma Lewis James was a Fairbury historian, and her primary book that she wrote was called Stuff, Clubs, and Antimacassars. In that book, she claimed there was an underground railroad route from Strawn to Odell, and this path included a stopover point at a small cabin on the Fugate farm northeast of Fairbury on the Vermilion River. Alma reported there was one enslaved person known to be buried by the riverbank. She said no other information about this route was available because all the activities were secret and they were done at night. Unfortunately, she does not cite any reference material sources for her story. I did check with a Fugate descendant who said that as a young boy, relatives would point out about where the cabin was and the burial was thought to be. Here's a very old photograph that was printed in the Fairbury Blade newspaper, and it was a potato sack race. Now, reading from the caption, there was also a colored brass band. Fairbury had a station on the Underground Railroad to help free slaves. It was a little cabin in the woods near the river. The railway portion, which concerned Fairbury, ran between Strawn and Odell. Unfortunately, I couldn't find any evidence to support or document the Strawn to Odell route. When I gave one of the talks, one of the attendees came up to me afterwards and said there is an Odell history book. It's kind of a pamphlet which has a photo of an Odell house which was supposedly used on the Underground Railroad. So maybe that is one form of documentation of this route. Now, what was the Fugitive Slave Act? Well, it was passed September 18th of 1850 by Congress. The Fugitive Slave Act of 1850 was part of the Compromise of 1850. The act required that slaves be returned to their owners even if they were found in a free state. The act also made the federal government responsible for finding, returning, and trying escaped slaves. A slave that was found in Livingston County legally was supposed to be returned to his or her master in the South. Dr. C.B. Ostrander was one of the first doctors in Livingston County. He lived between Fairbury and McDowell. The 1888 Livingston County history book recounts that Dr. Ostrander was also a staunch abolitionist. And it recounts that one day he came into Fairbury and found a fugitive slave chained to the floor of a two-story building. This fugitive slave was going to be returned to his master in Virginia. The doctor cut the shackles from the fugitive using a crowbar, sledgehammer, and a chisel. He loaded the fugitive into a horse-drawn buggy and delivered him to Dr. C.V. Dyer in Chicago. Dr. Ostrander also gave the fugitive $10 in cash, which would be equivalent to $372 in today's dollars. The fugitive was placed on Captain Blake's steamer named the Illinois. The steamer transported him to freedom in Maiden, Canada. The 1878 Livingston County history book contains a lot of information about several men in Pontiac who were strong abolitionists and participated in the Underground Railroad route that ran from Eppards Point Township, west of Fairbury, up to Pontiac and then on to Ottawa. The list of the 14 men in the history books include Owen Lovejoy, James Collins, Ichabod Codling, Chauncey Cook, Otis Richardson, John Hossack, William Fife, William Strawn, Otis Whaley, George and Xenophon Richards, Moses Rumery, C.B. Paget, and Dr. H.H. Hinnon. It'd be interesting to know if some of the descendants of these men still live in Livingston County. I didn't have time to do biographies on all of them, but I kind of have the sense they were doctors, lawyers, judges, and businessmen. I did go into the life story of William B. Fife because he's the one that drew the map we're going to refer to in a few minutes. One of the abolitionist leaders in the Pontiac area was William Fife, who lived from 1822 until 1910. He was actually born and raised in Scotland. He came to Canada in 1844 and worked in the mercantile business. In 1849, he moved to Ottawa, Illinois. While in Ottawa, he was a conductor and operated a safe house depot for the Underground Railroad. Then Mr. Fife became a lawyer. In 1856, Mr. Fife moved to Livingston County and set up a store in New Michigan for 2 years. New Michigan was north of Pontiac. Unfortunately, the new railroads did not go through New Michigan, so it became a ghost town. Mr. Fife became a farmer. In 1862, he moved to Pontiac and entered the law firm of E.A. Harding. That same year, he enlisted in the Union Army and he fought in the Civil War. Mr. Fife's experience as a conductor and depot operator in Ottawa, that's what likely led to the formation of an underground railroad line originating west of Fairbury at the Otis Richardson farm. That line ran north to Pontiac and then to Ottawa in LaSalle County. For his 1898 book on the Underground Railroad, Professor Seibert obtained a hand-drawn map of the stretch of the Underground Railroad from west of Fairbury up to Ottawa from William Fife. Mr. Fife died in 1910, so he likely provided the map to Professor Seibert for his 1898 book. Now here's a copy of the map and a little bit of written description from the 1898 book. It's kind of hard to read here, so we'll take a look at the map here in a second. Now let's redraw the map so it's a lot easier to read. Let's also split it up into Livingston County and LaSalle County. So on the south part, Livingston County, the blue path starts down at the Otis Richardson farm in Eppards Point Township. It goes north up to Pontiac Township to the Dr. Croswell station, goes through Esmond Township. The next stop is in Sunbury Township at Dr. H.H. Hinton's home. The northern part of this route in LaSalle County, down at the south end, is Mr. McLaughlin's station, then the Honorable William Strawn station, up to Ottawa, and then on to Chicago. And the list of names up at Ottawa is John Hansick, William Fife, George Fife, William Carter, and James Stout. Unfortunately, Mr. Fife's map extends only as far south as Otis Richardson's farm. The exact location of Richardson's farm is unknown at this time. I do know he was not the first one to buy that land from the federal government. He bought it later. South of Otis Richardson's farm would mark the end of Livingston County and the start of McLean County. Let's go check the McLean County history book and see what it says. The 1879 McLean County history book references the Underground Railroad having a station in Mount Hope Township. That township is just southwest of Bloomington. Mr. John Moss had a secret compartment in his house for hiding slave fugitives. Mr. Moss or one of his friends would guide the fugitives to one of two destinations. In poor weather, the first destination was Aunt Polly Mahan's station at Lexington. If there was good weather, or the weather was excellent, the more extended alternative destination were the abolitionists in New Michigan, operated by Charles Paget and his supporters in Livingston County. The Emancipation Proclamation was an executive order issued by President Abraham Lincoln in 1863 that declared enslaved people in the rebellious states to be free. It was a key step towards abolishing slavery, but it didn't abolish slavery permanently. Because of the Emancipation Proclamation, the Underground Railroad ceased operations around 1863. This work continued above ground as part of the Union's efforts against the Confederacy. Now let's take a look at the 13th Amendment. That amendment to the United States Constitution provides that neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as a punishment for crime whereof the party shall have been duly convicted, shall exist within the United States or any place subject to their jurisdiction. Since we've never had a constitutional amendment passed in our lifetime, let's just take a look at what happened on the 13th Amendment. On April 8th of 1864, the Senate passed it. January of 1865, the House of Representatives passed it. In February of 1865, President Lincoln approved the joint resolution of Congress that submitted the 13th Amendment to the states for ratification. April 9th, General Lee surrendered to General Grant, ending the Civil War. Unfortunately, 6 days later, on April 15th, President Lincoln was assassinated. On December 6th of 1865, the required 27 of the then 36 states ratified the amendment. So on December 18th of 1865, the 13th Amendment was proclaimed to be passed. Looking back, that was about a 20-month process. Dr. John Ryan lived from 1860 to 1948. Among other things, he was a minister or chaplain of the Boys Reformatory in Pontiac, which now, of course, is the Pontiac prison. He was the president of Livingston County Historical Society. He did research on the Underground Railroad for the Illinois State Historical Society in 1913. According to newspaper articles, he gave many talks on the Underground Railroad, including giving talks to Lexington students, probably about Aunt Polly's Stop, as we mentioned before. Unfortunately, I have found some of his research, but I have not yet found any of his research about the Underground Railroad. Now, some of my closing thoughts on this presentation. The issue of whether or not to return fugitive enslaved people to their owners in the South in the 1840 to 1863 era did have an impact on Fairbury and Livingston County citizens. A branch of the Underground Railroad running from west of Fairbury and through Pontiac on up to Ottawa did help many fugitive enslaved people obtain their freedom in Canada. On a different note, maybe someday some of Dr. Ryan's research on the Underground Railroad, his results will be found. And Lincoln issued a preliminary Emancipation Proclamation in September of 1862, and he said if the South did not rejoin the Union by January 1st, he would free all the slaves in the rebellious states. And that led to what commonly called the official Emancipation Proclamation. J. William Bilgould, who's a Fairbury native, recently released his unpublished manuscript about the Underground Railroad in Central Illinois. He titled it Comets of Conscience, Freedom Seekers, Abolitionists, and Leaders of the Underground Railroad in Central Illinois. A PDF copy of the unpublished manuscript is available from the Livingston County Historical Society website, which is livchs.org under the Resource tab. My understanding is the Pontiac Library is making a paper copy of this manuscript and will have it available in the History Room. I have briefly reviewed the 246 pages in this unpublished manuscript after I'd given the presentation several times. It does have biographies for most of the 14 abolitionist men in Livingston County that I mentioned before. The Underground Railroad exhibit was at the Pontiac Library starting January 31st of 2025, and then it stopped on display March 5th. It is moving around the state of Illinois, so if you have a chance, Google it, see what town it's at, and check it out. It has some very interesting displays and videos. If you have some questions about this presentation, you can always reach me through Facebook by sending me a PM message, or you can send me an email as well. This is the last slide in the presentation where I normally take questions from the audience. I hope you enjoyed the video and found the information useful. Thanks for watching, and please subscribe. Thank you.